Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of newspaper analysis. Today we are going to discuss Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 13th November 2019. The articles which we are going to discuss today are displayed on the screen. So let us start. Let us first begin with discussing the questions asked in GS Mains Examination 2019. This particular question has been taken from GS1 paper, question number 14. And this question is about water stress. What is water stress? How and why does it differ regionally in India? This was a 15 marks question and we had to answer this in 250 words. As you might be aware that the water stress was one of the most talked about news in 2019 and hence it was very obvious that this question belonged to current issues. We will start by analyzing how did we cover water stress in our various publications. Starting with DNS, which is our daily news simplified, uploaded every day on YouTube channel. Then we will see how did we cover water stress in our monthly magazine Focus, which covers issues relevant to UPSC on a monthly basis. And then we'll also see that how did we highlighted water stress in our mains compass magazine, which is a document published before the mains and it includes all the important events and relevant material for that particular mains examination. So in this case we published mains compass 2019 for 2019 GS paper. On your screen, as you can say that this is a clipping from DNS published on 19th November 2018. That's when water stress started to get the headlines. And this editorial talks about how thermal power plants exacerbate the water stress as they utilize a lot of water and how the availability of water affects our energy sector. In the same DNS, we also defined what is water stress. So the first part of the GS mains question talks about water stress and hence here you will get a clear cut and very good definition of water stress, which is when demand of water exceeds the availability of water during certain period or the poor quality of the same available water makes it unfit for use. Now in the same DNS, we also discussed the causes of water stress, which is either you will have the decline in availability of water or the deterioration in the quality of water because of pollution. Continuing with the discussion of water stress, we also had this discussion on Composite Water Management Index, which is released by Niti Aayog in association with Ministry of Water Resources in order to reflect upon water management status in various states. It becomes extremely relevant to the answer which we are going to discuss as the low ranking in water management index shows that particular state is not good at managing water. Prior to the above mentioned DNS of 19th November 2018, we had already published a DNS dated 15th of June 2018 which had a comprehensive discussion about Composite Water Management Index. What are the highlights of the index? What were the indicators which were used to analyze various states? And what were the main findings of the report? As you can see here, the indicators considered were groundwater restoration, irrigation management, drinking water supply, and other water policy frameworks. From this map, you can see the states marked with green, which are Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Andhra Pradesh, are not really the states which have very high water availability, but still they ranked high on this index. That's where the management of water comes in. And as you can see that all the states marked as red were low performers. State like UP, Bihar, they are not the states with low availability of water, but due to the poor management of water resources, they rank in low performance category. As you can see, in the same DNS, we also discussed the improvement made by various states, which are Jharkhand and Rajasthan, due to various initiatives taken by these respective state governments. Then we moved on to discuss this article, India is facing its worst water crisis, along with a sample answer on the question asked in 2015 General Studies paper, which was India is well endowed with fresh water resources. Critically examine why it still suffers from water scarcity. As the question asked about water resources, we discussed surface water resources, groundwater resources, and then we also discussed why India still suffers from water scarcity. We discussed how interstate river disputes play their role. Then there was discussion on international water disputes, for example, India Pakistan over Indus River Valley, then India Bangladesh over Tista River, India China over Brahmaputra River. Then we also talked about how agricultural utilization of water is extremely inefficient and the food production in India leads to water scarcity. There is another point to be noted from this particular slide is that in 2015 UPSC asked this question, critically examine why India suffers from water scarcity. In 2019 UPSC asked almost a similar question but with a little bit of variation, demanding us to state the variation of water stress regionally. So solving last year question papers is as important as keeping the track of current events. Then, in DNS published on June 21st, 2018, we had a discussion on Jal Swawalamban Abhiyan, which is an initiative taken by Rajasthan government, which is about restoration of irrigation potential of identified water bodies largely through community managed. Irrigation potential is simply the area that can be irrigated from irrigation project. So for example, let's say if a canal has been designed and let's say that this canal has enough water to supply to this region. Now what happens is that due to various factors, for example evaporation or due to lack of land leveling, the full potential of this canal will not be utilized. So if there is no land leveling, let's say, then this land has a topography, and let's say that this region marked in green is low and this region marked in red has higher elevation. So obviously, even if this variation is 5 to 10 centimeter, water will not be able to flow to these regions and hence the full potential of this irrigation project of this canal will not be utilized. Similarly, if there is a lot of evaporation from this canal, the water will dry out and it will not be available to the fields far off from the canal. So in this DNS, we discussed how irrigation potential of Rajasthan's surface water is being enhanced. In the same DNS published on June 21st, 2018, we also had a discussion about the program of Government of India which is known as Jal Kranti Abhiyan. It is an initiative of Ministry of Water Resources, River Development and Ganga Rejuvenation. Now what is the main motive behind this Abhiyan? The main motive behind this program is to consolidate water conservation and management. So it is an initiative to basically enhance the quality as well as quantity of fresh water through stakeholders approach. Who are the stakeholders in any water situation? One of the stakeholder is government. Then as we know that most of the fresh water is utilized in agriculture, so most important stakeholder is farmer. Then we also know that an important aspect of water utilization is domestic use and hence we have households. Hence under Jan Kanti Abhiyan, modern techniques with traditional wisdom will be utilized to increase water security. Moving on to the next DNS. This particular DNS was published on 28th of May 2018 in which the water stress in Gujarat was discussed. As you know that the question which we are discussing asks us to discuss how water stress varies, and this particular slide is extremely relevant because this shows how water stress was created in Gujarat. So as you can see here that it received less rainfall which led to fall in reservoir storage levels. And we had also discussed the role of heat waves in creating water stress in Gujarat. Now, slowly and steadily, we have a build up towards how water stress varies regionally in India. In the same DNS published on May 28, 2018, we continued from Gujarat's discussion and suggested certain solutions to solve this problem of water shortage. So, one of the solutions is about creation of water storage structures, and the another is about that protection of small wetlands. We also discussed Mishra committee report which highlighted that the public irrigation efficiency is only 35%, which means that if 100 liters of water goes into irrigation, only 35 liter is utilized in fruitful manner. So you can see that the water stress has been extensively covered in our DNS. Now let's have a look at our other publication, which is Focus magazine. This particular article has been taken from our Focus magazine published in November 2018. India's overexploitation of groundwater is contributing to worst water crisis in its history. In this context, there is urgent need for introducing policies to promote judicious use of groundwater. So, in this answer, we discussed how agriculture is majorly responsible for groundwater depletion and how, through various government policies like MSP and then income inequality and unsustainable agriculture, lead to groundwater depletion. And we also suggested policies in order to solve this problem. In another Focus magazine published in May 2019, we discussed how depletion in monsoon rainfall causes water deficit and what are the reasons responsible for groundwater depletion. We also discussed two case studies. Then in our Compass magazine, we had a discussion on water audit. A water audit is basically an examination of how effective we are managing our water resources. Water audit is extremely important as it brings out the deficiencies in our water management cycle. Then we also discussed National Water Mission and its identified goals. Now, if we have a look at freshwater resources in India, they can be basically categorized into three parts. One of them is surface water, which basically is derived from either rivers or lakes and sometimes from tanks. Then we have groundwater, which is underground water. We also have lagoons and backwaters in coastal regions of the country. Now, if we analyze the map of India, you might gather from your existing knowledge that rivers acts as a major source of fresh water in Ganga basin, Krishna, Godavari and Kaveri basin, whereas groundwater acts as a major source of water supply in Punjab and Haryana region, and that is also a cause of concern because it is leading to over exploitation. There is also a system of canal irrigation in this region. As we know that India has a vast coastline and the coast is very indented in some states. Due to this, a number of lagoons and lakes have formed. You must be aware of Chilka Lake, Vembanad Lake. These all are backwaters and lagoons. Although water is generally brackish, that is salty, in these water bodies, it is used for fishing and irrigation in certain varieties of paddy crops and coconuts. So, although the lagoons and backwater water is not directly used for drinking purposes, but still it reduces the burden on underground water and surface water. Moving on to water demand and utilization. Dividing the water demands in sectors, we have three major sectors. One is agriculture, another is domestic, and third is industry. Those are the three major utilization of water. As far as the surface water utilization is concerned, we can see that only 11% of the surface water is utilized by domestic and industry sector. Rest 89% of the surface water is utilized by agriculture. Situation gets even worse if we analyze groundwater resources. Around 92% of groundwater resources are utilized in agriculture, and hence you might be having an idea as to where the major problem lies, and you are correct that it is agricultural use of water. Now coming back to answering the question, which is about water stress. Now, as we had already discussed in the slides above, it is a situation where the demand of water exceeds that of supply. Now let's discuss the causes for increase in demand and reduction in supplies. Now, as we know that per capita availability of water is dwindling day by day due to increase in population. A very relevant graph, as you can see on the screen, that this is a graph of water availability measured in cubic meters versus the years. And the graph has been taken from the website of World Bank. Now, freshwater availability per capita, that means how much cubic meter of water is available per person, is plotted for India, which is in sky blue color, and for the world in magenta color. As you can see, that despite having so much of water, the overall water availability per capita has been extremely low as compared to the world averages. And there is another pattern which is clearly visible is that across the world, including India, there is a sharp decline in water available to people, which is this. So this shows that the supply of water per person is reducing. Now let's analyze the answer. As the first part of the question has been discussed in the DNS and in this video also, this part can be easily answered. It's very easy to design an introduction because the water stress has been in news a lot. Either we can go by mentioning the reduction in water availability, and we can also mention some current event, for example mentioning Shimla or Chennai or Kerala water crisis. Now the first part of the question needs to be answered, which is defining what is water stress. Now coming to the second part of the answer, which is how and why does it differ regionally in India. Now answering the how part, we can take the help of Composite Water Management Index presented by Niti Aayog. Do you remember that map in which states like Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh and Andhra Pradesh were shown to have a better water management? And hence we can draw a map of India in which we can show that what is the current level of water management across India. Now in this section of the answer, we have to elaborate upon various causes of water stress in various parts of the country. So starting with the why part, as we have to address this portion regionally, either we can divide it on the basis of geographic regions, for example, plains, hilly region, coastal areas, and we can also go about answering it by dividing the country into rural versus urban, which we shall deal with in the next part. Now, as we know that the main source of our surface water supplies is monsoonal rains. Southwest monsoons, the majority of rainfall is derived from the incoming monsoon, and then certain part of the region also derive rain from northeast monsoon, which is retreating monsoon. Now if either of the two monsoons fail, there is a reduction in the supply of water, which leads to water stress. This is demonstrated by the condition of Gujarat, which was discussed in 2018 DNS, and also in Tamil Nadu 2018 retreating northeast monsoon. Now in plains which have river valleys, excessive rainfall causes floods. Now this floods leads to the intrusion of polluted water in surface water bodies as well as in groundwater, which makes those freshwater sources unfit for drinking. That is why in flood like situation we have water stress. Then in hilly region, the problem of lack of storage exacerbates the water stress conditions. For example, the Shimla water crisis of 2017 and 18 was because first the monsoons failed. On top of that, the storage capability of these hilly regions are extremely small, and hence it leads to creation of water stress. As we know that salt water is not fit for drinking, and hence the coastal areas are perennially dependent on underground water for drinking purposes. Let's understand this salt water intrusion phenomena with the help of a diagram. So this is some coastal region and this is ocean. Now this coastal region is deriving water from an underground source which is marked in blue. Excessive exploitation of underground water, what happens is that these pores are left vacant. This creates an inward pressure from salt water which enables the salt water to move towards this vacant region. And now we have a mixing of salt water and fresh water to create a brackish water, which creates water stress like situation. Starting with rural areas, as we have discussed that around 90% of the water is being utilized in agriculture, and hence agricultural overuse and inefficient water use by agriculture is the major reason for water depletion in rural areas. It leads to depletion of freshwater resources. This situation is highlighted by the depletion in water level observed in Punjab and Haryana. The situation of urban areas is best exemplified by this recent scenario presented in Chennai. As we know that most urban centers are dependent on some or the other rivers or canals for their freshwater usage. Now the extremely polluted nature of the water of the rivers makes it unfit for the use. So although the quantity of water available is decent, but that the quality of water is so deteriorated that it is unfit for drinking. Then we know that our urban areas are extremely densely populated, which leads to overutilization. Then very important aspect of water supply in urban areas is disappearance of wetlands. These wetlands are like safety nets. They store water during those periods when the supply of water is excessive, and hence they prevent flood. But the same water is then utilized by us when there is a water stress or water scarcity. Now, since these wetlands are disappearing in the country due to encroachment and various other anthropogenic factors, this safety net is disappearing, and hence we are facing the situation of water stress more often. I hope that by now it is clear that how the causes of water stress vary regionally. It is important to end with either a solution or a conclusion. We have discussed in the previous slides how Jal Kranti Abhiyan and Jal Savalamban Abhiyan, along with the creation of Jal Shakti Mantralaya and various other measures like Integrated Watershed Management Program, we can mention these initiatives taken by the government to show that government is also concerned about the situation of water stress in the country. Conclude by demonstrating the significance of water in various aspects of life as well as in development of the country. Let's now move on to the next news. The editorial published on page number 10, the problem with rebasing GDP estimates. Now, the National Statistical Office has recently proposed to replace the existing base year of 2011 and 12 with that of 2017 and 18 for calculating the GDP estimates in India. Such periodic change in base year is carried out after every 7 to 10 years in order to reflect the changing economic structure and relative prices of goods and services. So this is not something which is new. From time to time, government has carried on the revision of base year. So first let's understand the relevance of this article with our UPSC syllabus. As far as prelims exams syllabus is concerned, this gets covered under economic and social development. As far as main syllabus is concerned, this particular article is very important for GS3 mains paper under Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth and development and employment. In order to understand this article completely, we need to have understanding of certain basic terms which are GDP, nominal GDP, real GDP and base year. Let's now understand these terms. As the name suggests, GDP is gross domestic product, which refers to the market value of all final goods and services produced within an economy. For example, if an economy produces 10 toys worth rupees 10 each, then the overall GDP would be 100 rupees. Now, a very important term in the definition of GDP is market value of all final goods and services produced. Now, we have to always keep in mind that the intermediate products produced in an economy and their value are not taken into account while calculating GDP. So there are two ways of calculating GDP. Now, one is nominal GDP, another is real GDP. Now, in order to calculate nominal GDP, now real GDP refers to GDP at base year prices, that is the GDP calculated as per the market prices in the base year, while nominal GDP refers to GDP at current market prices. Now here comes the role of base year. Let's understand it. As you can see that we have considered 2011 and 2019 for understanding the difference between real and nominal GDP. Let's consider an economy which produces only one product and in quantity 10. So in 2011, let's say that quantity is pen. So in that economy, only one kind of pen is produced, but the total number of pens produced is 10. So in 2011, that economy produced 10 pens and the price of each pen was rupees 10. So the GDP comes out to be 100 as it is the total value of all goods and services produced. Now in 2019, let's say the production has not increased and after 8 years, the same economy is producing 10 pens. But due to the inflation, the price of each pen has now increased to 15 rupees while earlier it was only 10 rupees. The GDP of that economy has increased to rupees 150. So as far as nominal GDP is concerned, it refers to the GDP at current market prices. So in this case, nominal GDP comes out to be rupees 150. But real GDP refers to the GDP at base year prices. So in this case, the base year is 2011 with which we are comparing the value. GDP at base year prices means that the current production needs to be multiplied with the price of the base year. So in this case, the production is 10 and the base year price is 10. So real GDP comes out to be 100. Now it is important to reflect that why real GDP and nominal GDP both need to be calculated. So in a scenario where the production of the goods has not increased, for example in this case, but still the GDP value got inflated because of inflation. So to differentiate between actual increase in production and actual increase in the market prices, it is important to calculate both real GDP and nominal GDP. After understanding these two key terms, let's now understand the recent changes in GDP estimations which were done in 2015. So the first change which was done in 2015 was the shift of base year from 2004-5 to 2011-12. Now it is important to understand that why these base years are shifted. As we know that our economy keeps on changing and there are new goods and services which keep on adding on to our existing economic setup. So for example, e-commerce is a new entrant to our economic landscape. But earlier in 2004 and 5, we did not used to take into account the goods and services added by e-commerce. Now change in GDP estimation from GDP at factor cost to GDP at market prices. Just now we understood what GDP at market prices means. Let's now understand what GDP at factor cost means. GDP at factor cost is simply net value added in various economic activities. Let us understand this concept with the help of simple example. If a manufacturer of bread purchases the grain at rupees 100 and out of the same grain produces a bread which is sold at rupees 300, so the net value addition by this manufacturer is rupees 200. Similarly, if we calculate all the value added into our economy and add it, that is known as GDP at factor cost. And hence in 2015, the methodology of GDP estimation was changed from factor cost to market prices. The third and the most important change which was effected in 2015 was the change of data set. So, while estimation of GDP, we need to know the various economic activities which are going on in our economy. So, we need to know that what goods are being produced, and we also need to know what kind of services are being provided. And for this purpose, the government maintains a data set. Prior to 2015, government used RBI's database to calculate GDP, which was changed to MCA 21, which is an e-governance program, which is Ministry of Corporate Affairs 21 database, which has a list of companies contributing to the economic production of the country. This database is basically used for two purposes. Number one is it will estimate the production of goods and services in the organized sector based upon the tax returns. The government will analyze the tax return to formulate the growth of organized sector. And the second purpose is to extrapolate the organized sector's production curve on unorganized sector. What does this mean? So for example, government found through process 1 that the growth of organized sector is, let's say, 10%. Government does not have any data of unorganized sector because they are outside the purview of formal sector. Now, government will simply project this 10% on the remaining unorganized sector as well. Now let's see what the article has to offer. So first and the foremost is critique of the current estimation of the GDP. According to the latest GDP estimates, the GDP growth in India has declined to 5% in the first quarter of the financial year 2019-20. However, for the past 4 years, there has been a controversy over the current GDP figures on account of questionable methodologies and databases used. As we just discussed in the last article, the methodology was changed as well as the data set was changed. So the economists have questioned both the changes. As you must be aware that some prominent economists like our ex-chief economic advisor Mr. Arvind Subramaniam has highlighted that India may be overestimating its GDP due to this flawed approach. So for example, if our GDP is this, due to the flawed method or the data or both of them, we could be estimating our GDP to be this. In this regard, let us understand as to what are these controversies over methodologies and databases used in GDP estimates. Now, the first doubts which the economists have raised is regarding flawed databases. As you know that in 2015 we have shifted to MCA 21 database. A recent survey by NSSO has shown that around 38% of the firms in MCA 21 are shell companies which are not engaged in any economic activity. Now we know that GDP is actual production of goods and services, exists only on paper. Obviously, neither it is producing any goods nor it is providing any services but filing tax returns, which enable it to be included in MCA 21 database. If we keep including these companies for GDP estimation, then we would end up overestimating our GDP. Moving on to the flawed methodology. If you remember from the last slide, MCA 21 database uses the organized sector's growth to project it on unorganized sector, assuming that these two behave in sync. But however, this assumption looks extremely flawed. For instance, after the twin shocks of demonetization and GST, the ground realities have clearly showed that it is the unorganized sector which has got more adversely affected than the organized sector. Hence, there was a general decline in the economic activity in India during the demonetization year 2016 and 17. So it is not correct. So it is incorrect to project organized sector growth on unorganized sector. Similarly, the same flawed methodology and database have been used for state domestic products. There is another problem in MCA 21 database. It does not exactly pinpoint the location of industries. Rather, it merely pinpoints the head offices of the company. Now, in order to correctly estimate the GDP of states, we need to have the exact information of the industries in each and every state. In absence of such data, we would not be able to come up with a reliable estimate. A company headquartered in Mumbai has production in UP. According to MCA 21 methodology, whatever production occurs at UP will be added to Maharashtra's GSDP, which is totally incorrect. So these are the major flaws with the current estimation of our GDP. Also, the present ground realities are in stark contrast to the official GDP estimates. We have to realize that the larger data sets do not necessarily translate into better GDP estimates. Unfortunately, it is the integrity of the data which would ensure correct GDP estimates. In this regard, there is a need to address the various flaws in MCA 21 database. Hence, government should focus on establishment of independent commission of experts to review the GDP methodology. And the second point is just the change of base year will not be helpful in the current situation, and there is a need to overhaul the overall system of estimation of GDP. Ultimately, we need to understand that the credibility of Indian economy would depend upon our ability to come out with foolproof, error-free and indisputable GDP estimates. With this, let's now move on to the next news. Next article is again editorial taken from page number 10. A partnership for stability, security and growth. This article has been written by Sergei Lavrov, who is the foreign minister of Russia. On the eve of 11th summit, which is about to begin in Brazil, he has highlighted the role which BRICS can play in contemporary global world politics and geostrategy, as well as he highlights the convergences in the interests of various member countries. BRICS is an extremely important international grouping from the point of view of prelim syllabus, international importance, current events of national importance, as well as in GS2 mains paper, bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India and or affecting India's interests. To highlight the importance of BRICS as a grouping, we will take the example of a question asked in prelims 2015. The Fortaleza Declaration recently in news is related to the affairs of ASEAN, BRICS, OECD, WTO. So Fortaleza Declaration is related to BRICS. We will first understand the genesis of the BRICS, then we will have a look at few of the important summits, and then we will analyze the importance of BRICS as a grouping for India. BRICS as a grouping is unique in the sense that idea to form this association did not come from member countries, but rather it came from an economist known as Jim O'Neill, who was then chairman of Goldman Sachs. He highlighted the role of BRIC, which is Brazil, Russia, India and China, as very important nations in coming decades, which had the potential to challenge the developed nations. A very important question for pre could be who gave the idea of BRICS? So remember it's Jim O'Neill. Also remember that South Africa is a later entrant in the grouping. As you can see that initially it was just Brazil, Russia, India and China. Russia, India and China met in St. Petersburg. The same year this grouping was formalized at the first BRIC foreign ministers meet at United Nations General Assembly in New York. The first BRICS summit was held in Yekaterinburg, Russia in 2009. It is very important to remember that although BRICS was conceptualized in 2001, its first summit took place in 2009. Then it is also important to remember 2010 summit becomes important as South Africa was added in BRIC and which became BRICS. Sixth BRICS summit, Fortaleza, is extremely important as it resulted in the official inauguration of New Development Bank, which is a multilateral development bank which is meant to act as an alternative to World Bank and International Monetary Fund. For 2020 prelims exams, it is important to remember that this is an 11th summit which is being organized in Brazil, and the theme of BRICS summit is economic growth for an innovative future. Now let's understand the importance of BRICS for India, and this is basically important for GS mains point of view, where either we could be asked to critically analyze the BRICS as a grouping or its significance for India. Now BRICS is extremely important because the five economics consisting BRICS form 42% of the world population and around 1/4 of the global GDP. So both demographically as well as economically, the grouping is extremely important. All five, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, belong to Global South, which is a term used by World Bank to refer to low and middle income countries located in Asia, Africa, Latin America. In contrast to high income or developed countries, this acts as a platform for the underdeveloped regions of the world. As you know that all the world institutions, be it World Bank, IMF or United Nations, are controlled by developed countries. The agenda of developing countries rarely find any mention in those forums. The only exception being Russia, which is a middle income country. These five countries are also the members of G20. We have seen the rise of Russia and China as a geopolitical power and decline of US as the same. And since India has good relations with both these sides, India can play a balancing role through BRICS. As we all know that India is pursuing the agenda of terrorism and insurgency across the world very effectively, and India has been successful in making terrorism as one of the key focus of BRICS. This is indicated by the decision of the Joint Working Group on Counter-Terrorism to constitute sub-working groups in 5 areas: terrorist financing, use of internet for terrorist purposes, counter radicalization, the issue of foreign terrorist fighters, and capacity building. It is also expected that India will chair the subgroup on use of internet for terrorist purposes. As we just discussed, that multilateral institutions like WTO do not act in the best interest of developing nations, and hence through BRICS, India can forward the agenda of reform of these institutions. Now, another key term which can be asked in prelim exam is Sherpa mechanism, and it can be simply mentioned as which of the following correctly explains the Sherpa mechanism. For a multilateral grouping like BRICS, agenda has to be decided before the heads of the states or the ministers actually meet, and it takes a lot of time to do that. So, before the actual meeting starts, representatives of states and governments lay out preparation for significant global summits. This makes the actual summit themselves more efficient. And this is simply because before the actual summit starts, all the things have been decided and the discussion takes place only on the issues which need to be discussed between the heads of the states. Now let's move on to the next news. Now this news has been taken from page number 9. Pneumonia, diarrhea still a big threat. Now anywhere in the syllabus, diseases are not directly mentioned. But if you analyze the past year question papers, you will see that almost every year there is one or two questions related to diseases. So for example, in 2015 preliminary exam, the question was asked about swine flu or H1N1 virus, and hence it becomes extremely important to cover some of the diseases in little details. Let's now understand pneumonia, its causes, its transmission, the risk groups, as well as the prevention methods. Pneumonia and Diarrhea Progress Report Card has been released by International Vaccine Access Center of Johns Hopkins on World Pneumonia Day, according to which poor health systems are the leading cause of mortality due to pneumonia worldwide. So it says that a timely intervention in case of pneumonia disease can save lives, and lack of timely intervention leads to a lot of deaths. It also states that lack of access to vaccines and treatments in 23 countries with poor health system causes about 75% of the deaths due to pneumonia. Now let's understand the basics of pneumonia disease. Now as we know that human respiratory system, air that is inhaled through mouth or nose passes through pharynx, which is this portion of the body, larynx, and enters the trachea, which is the windpipe, which bifurcates into right and left bronchi, which are branched into bronchioles in the lungs. The bronchioles deliver air into alveoli in the lungs, also called as air sacs. So this region, it is at the alveoli that the exchange of gases between air and blood takes place through capillary action. Now pneumonia is a respiratory infection in which alveoli, instead of air, is filled with pus and fluid, making it difficult to breathe and thus limiting oxygen intake. So this region is completely filled with air. Now in case of pneumonia, this region gets filled with either water or pus, and hence it interferes with the absorption of oxygen in the lungs, and this condition is known as pneumonia. Now pneumonia is the largest cause of mortality in children due to infectious diseases. So for example, if you make a list of all infectious diseases which kill children, pneumonia is the number one in that rank list. Children aged below 5, around 15% die due to pneumonia. So we can see that how dangerous is this disease. Let's move on to the causes of pneumonia. Pneumonia is an infectious disease, and this infection can be caused by bacteria, virus, or fungi. So we need to pay attention at this point These are one of those rare diseases which can be caused by all kinds of parasites. It is also important to mention that the most common infectious agent that causes pneumonia in children is Streptococcus pneumonia, which is a strain of bacteria. Transmission of pneumonia takes place either through airborne route or through blood transfusion. Now let's see that who are the high risk groups as far as pneumonia is concerned. Now since pneumonia is an infectious disease, all those people with weak immune system are at high risk. They are children or people with immune compromised system like HIV patients. There are certain environmental factors also which increase the risk of pneumonia, like indoor pollution caused by cooking and heating of biomass fuels, as well as parental smoking. Now let's discuss the prevention and treatment. There exist vaccines like pneumococcal vaccine, so immunization, then adequate nutrition, then administering antibiotics is very effective treatment. Now with reference to pneumonia, it is important to discuss global action plan for pneumonia and diarrhea, which is a joint program of WHO and UNICEF. It sets the target of 2025 and by then it wants to reduce mortality from pneumonia children under age 5 to less than 3 per thousand live births. And it also wants to reduce the incidence of severe pneumonia by 75% in children less than 5 years of age. Let's now move on to the next article. Now this last article which we are going to discuss today is one of the most important issues plaguing our Indian political system. But we are deliberately discussing it towards the end of our DNS because this has been extensively covered in the past DNS. Now, you must have read that you must be aware that post-election results in Maharashtra, no party was able to form a government and the governor invited all the factions one by one. But inability of any party to form a government led to the imposition of president's rule in Maharashtra. Now Shiv Sena, a political party in Maharashtra, is now challenging this governor's decision. This is an extremely important political issue. As far as prelims syllabus is concerned, it gets covered under Indian polity, governance, constitution, political system. As far as main syllabus is concerned, it gets covered under GS2 under the headings appointment to various constitutional posts, powers. So the post of governor is a constitutional post and we also need to be aware about its powers, functions and responsibility in order to be able to judge whether the governors are carrying out their responsibilities correctly or not. Then functions and responsibilities of the union and the states, issues and challenges pertaining to federal structure. Now the relation between the union government and the state government through governor comes under federal structure of the India, and hence it is a very important issue. We will discuss the provisions in the constitution regarding president's rule in a succinct manner. So the relevant articles are Article 355 and 356. Article 355 obliges the center to ensure that the governance of state is to be carried out in accordance with the constitutional provisions, whereas Article 356 is the one which is used to impose the president rule in any of the states under certain conditions. But before imposition there needs to be a governor's report. After the imposition of the president rule, functions of the state government can be assumed by governor. State legislatures' functions can be exercised by the parliament. Various provisions of the constitution which relates to authority of the state, except that of High Court, can be suspended. Now there is a need for parliamentary approval for proclamation of emergency, the provisions for which have been clearly written here, which you can read. Also, you can watch the Daily News Simplified of 26th of August 2019. The same DNS also discussed the changes brought by 44th Amendment Act of 1978, which added a clause under which the extension of president rule beyond 1 year needs to satisfy one of the two criteria. Number one is if there is a national emergency in operation, and number two is if the election commission says that legislative assembly elections cannot be held. Now, SR Bommai case of 1994 is extremely important because it held that president's proclamation is subject to judicial review. which held that President's proclamation is subject to judicial review, and hence this is the clause which has been utilized by Shiv Sena in the current case and has challenged the order of the President. It also stated that President's satisfaction should be relevant and bona fide. We should also be aware of the Sarkaria Commission report regarding President rule. For detailed analysis of President rule and various provisions associated, please go through DNS dated 26th of August 2019. Now let us take up some questions related to prelims examination. The first question is, which of the following causes pneumonia? Virus, bacteria, fungi. If you remember from the discussion on pneumonia and diarrhea, all three are responsible for causing pneumonia, and hence the correct answer is D. Next question is, which of the following country was not the founding member of BRICS? India, China, South Africa and Brazil. If you remember that the South Africa was the last one to join the organization in 2010, and hence the correct answer is C. Now the last question is, which of the following articles provide grounds for the imposition of President's rule? Article 355, Article 365 and Article 356. All these three articles are related to imposition of President's rule in any state. Two of them mention the criteria for imposition of President rule, while third one deals with the imposition. Hence answer D is correct. With this we come to the end of the discussion. Now let's take up the practice question.